While there are a number of passionate bicycle riders in Europe and North America, and many bike brands in both those places, today the vast majority of manufacturing for bike brands is done in Asia. That was not always the case. So what changed? How did we get here? Today, I am happy to have an expert on the show to answer exactly those questions. Bike industry veteran Bill McGann recently released a book called Why Your Bike is Made in Asia. Bill opened a bike shop in the U.S. in California back in 1974 with European bikes and parts, and then he launched Torelli Imports in the early 80s. In the years since, he has seen some drastic changes, and he documents those in his new book. There are certainly brands making stuff outside of Asia. Here in the U.S., those brands are almost entirely boutique makers. You've got Number 22 or Mosaic doing titanium frames. You've got Argonaut or Bridge doing carbon. Bridge is up in Canada, North America, I should have said. For wheels, you've got Industry 9 and Gulo both in North Carolina. And then Envy out in Utah makes some of its wheels there in its Ogden facility, and much of its production is, you guessed it, in Asia. None of these are cheap. We've got a similar situation in Europe. Time makes its bikes in Slovakia. It's Time, not on the scale of Giant, but is similarly unique in that it's one of the brand-facing brands that also actually makes its bikes instead of going to a factory to make its bikes. Anyhow, that's in Slovakia. And some brands work with factories in Eastern Europe for parts and clothing. There are a few, made in Italy options done within brands. Like, for instance, 3T has some Italia frame sets, like its Race Max Italia frame set. That goes for a cool $6,400 for the frame set. A similar price in euros. Point is, the vast majority of bikes and wheels and components are made in Asia. The top end stuff in Taiwan, and then a lot of stuff in China, and then now a lot of brands are going elsewhere: Bangladesh, Malaysia, Vietnam. Why is that? Cost now, certainly, but was that the initial reason? How did we get here? For one man's long-range perspective, let's go now to my interview with Bill McGann. Bill McGann, esteemed author and longtime bike industry veteran. How are you, sir? Good to see you.
I'm well, thank you. It's a nice rainy day here in Oregon.
It is a sunshiny day, cold but sunshiny here in Colorado. With the U.S. presidential elections recently passed, there's a lot of talk about many things, but within the bike industry, it was like, what way will the bike industry go in terms of manufacturing? And the short answer that I have is nobody knows what the future holds, but one thing that we do know is what the past held. And I'm happy to have your expertise and all your history here to help viewers understand some of how we got to here in terms of manufacturing. And now, you opened your bike shop in 1974, 2 years before I was born.
June 1st, 1974, the day the bike boom ended. There was a gigantic bike boom from about 1969 into June of 1974, and everyone had to have a bicycle. Both the bike companies went as hard as they could making bikes. Schwinn, I think, might have been running 24 hours a day. Their factories, 3 shifts. Everyone was making bikes as fast as they could, and some of them they shouldn't have sold, which is part of the story, because they were just too hurried to just get it out. And I opened my shop on June 1st, and 6 months after that, the other import bike shop went out of business because the bottom had fallen out. But I was a ne'er-do-well, and I lived in the back of an old lady's house. The car I had was a 1967 Chevrolet, and I rode my bike around to do things. And so I had no expenses of any real sort. And so I didn't need to draw money out of my shop when I opened it, which is a good
Now
thing.
you're saying
Real money.
Yeah. You were saying that there was bicycles being made as fast as they could, and some of them actual quality bicycles, and some of them what my British colleagues would call bicycle-shaped objects, of things that look kind of like bikes but aren't
Yes.
great bikes. But paint a picture for us, if you would, for like what the landscape looked like in terms of manufacturing. Like, where were
Okay.
bikes and bike pieces being made?
Okay, bikes
in the
were,
70s.
in general, June 1st, 1974. Um, there were Schwinn's made in Chicago, and Schwinn in the bike boom joined everyone else in making bikes of questionable quality when before the Schwinn bikes were superbly made. They might not have been a bicycle I wanted to ride, but a Schwinn Varsity 42 pounds that was made in 1965, maybe 1968 when it came out. I can't remember, but or any of the bikes, they were well made, and but they jumped in for the business of a lifetime. And uh, the bicycle companies in Europe, Peugeot, Jeton, I can go on. They were selling bicycles, Raleigh. They were hurriedly made. I was excited to be a Raleigh dealer after I'd been in business for about 6 months. And their budget bike, I think $129 bike was the Raleigh record. And I had some that had ancient three-piece steel hubs, believe it or not. Um, the lugs were so badly brazed. I remember one I could stick my thumbnail in the gap in the lug uh, because it had been so hurriedly brazed. The jetons were properly brazed, but they were all crooked. And I describe in my book that what I would do at night was strip the bike, string it, and straighten in my back room, uh, and then realign it, and then put it together and put it on the floor. Uh, I told a friend who was also a bike seller in the mid 70s that I was going to burn in hell. Um, he asked why, and I said, because I sold Raleighs during the bike boom. And he said, we all did that. We're all going to burn. I'll have plenty of company.
What bikes did you most appreciate in the 70s? Like what were the best bikes at the time and
Well,
where were they made?
well, there were two classes of bikes. After I had been in business, I think for about 2 years, um, a man named Bill Henry, who had been the Peugeot sales representative, became the representative for Centurion, which were made in Japan. And I was quite ideological about bicycles. And I thought because Europeans, they had the Tour de France, Giro d'Italia, this was where bicycles, the culture was, and they knew what they were doing. And he brought a Centurion to me, and I put it on the stand and I looked at it, and it was perfect. And this
Oh,
was this was hard to take for an ideologue like me.
uh,
I was
uh-huh.
a true believer, and I realized that this was a vastly superior bicycle to what I had been foisting off on my customers. And very soon, all my European bikes were gone, and I had a shop full of Centurions with but one exception, with a couple of exceptions. I still believe the Peugeot PX10, the Reynolds 531 bike with Strong-Light 93 cranks and Moffat brakes, uh, at $249 was a perfect entry level racing bikes. If you had that and you didn't win the race, you could not blame your bike. And
Uh-huh.
it was your legs. And so I kept Peugeot so that I had access to the PX10. And then there was a lovely man in San Francisco named Murphy who imported the connoisseurs Italian bikes. And as long as he was in business, I sold the bikes like that he imported, like Frigis. And
Hmm.
so I had a blend there. But it was about 2 years that I abandoned my European bikes and was selling Japanese bikes. And when I opened my shop, I had to come up with ways to differentiate myself from other shops because I was young and stupid and poor. But what I did have was time. So I
Hmm.
just figured I would be open 9 to 9, 7 days a week, closed for Christmas and Easter. And I did that.
Wow.
And that was the first part of my marketing. And the second thing was I promised everyone that bought a bike from me that I would do all the adjustments for free for 2 years, 2 years free service. And I had no money. I had time. I had $3,000, and I borrowed $3,000 to open the shop, and that I'd saved up working in a gas station. So I had 2 years free service and opened 9 to 9, and that combination succeeded. Just giving the very best service I could is just love my customers to death.
Yeah, 2 years of free service. That's I could just imagine talking to any number of bike shop owner friends now. Their eyeballs would pop out of their sockets if you
But if you
suggested that they give
but if
2 years of free service.
if you get it set up right, you help the customer learn how to ride the bike and how it works. And this was before mountain bikes, and
Hmm.
so there wasn't that stress put on it. There was just nice road bikes, and at that time, most people just wanted to go out and ride for a Sunday. And if a guy
Sure,
bought a pro bike,
sure.
he was going to ride the wheels off it. I made plenty of money off it. I can take care of him. I can adjust his derailleurs for him.
Now, jump ahead to Torelli Imports was a business you started in the 80s.
Yeah.
Is that correct? In the early 80s.
Yes.
And what brands were you importing and where were those made? What was the attraction for you there? What was
Well,
the attraction for your customers?
what I started off because um, I wanted to sell uh, higher end European bikes, and I wrote to a company called MKM, uh, Mason Metcalf, and Mason Kitching and Metcalf was it, and this
Okay.
was they were in northern England. Harrogate was it? Yeah, and you see me looking over my wife, and she's nodding yes. And we went to go see them, and we imported a few of their frames for the shop, and that went reasonably well. And then we private labeled them, and under the name Vulcan, which I thought he was the metal worker for the gods. That would be perfect. But it turned out that I wasn't thinking about popular culture and Spock, and so people made fun. I did zero market research on that, and I paid for that. When we finally did end up importing bikes from Italy a few years later, we knew that we would have to be much more careful about the name. And so I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Will and Ariel Durant's History of the World. It's 11 volumes, which is, since I
No.
didn't go to college, that's how I educated myself working graveyard in a gas station. I read Will and Ariel Durant's History of the World. And the volume of the Renaissance, the index had tons of Italian names. So Carol and I, my wife, just went through the index and found a name we liked that would not be mispronounced like Chinelli with that arch C, and would look graphically good. And I had an artist friend and a commercial designer, so we showed him the name, and he approved the name. So Torelli was what we picked, and we started branding our products under the Torelli name, and started importing bikes. We went through several different builders and companies. Sometimes they got cocky, and but we ended up finding a guy in San Marino, not actually in Italy. San Marino's a little tiny country in Italy, like the Vatican City, and
Uh-huh.
I'm sure he was there for tax purposes. And he made very nice, complete bikes for us. And we found other guys to make frame sets for us to our specifications, to our quality. And we learned very early on that the frames would have to be tap face and aligned here because shops really didn't have all the tools back then. Not everyone had a Campanile tool set. And we bought a Marchetti and Lange alignment table. So every frame we sold was tap face and aligned and went out so that the shop could just put it together and it would track and write correctly.
So why go to a country within Italy for an Italian sounding import business? Why not find someone in the U.S. to build frames for you?
Um, I didn't know anyone who could do what we wanted, the production, low cost products that were uh, being made in Europe. And I wasn't aware of anyone. And so it seemed to me that Italy would be the natural place to go.
Mhm. So at the time there was both the cultural significance of Italian cycling.
of course.
Uh,
The magic, the
Viewers,
mystique.
for your reference, if you're, I'm sure you guys follow pro racing, or at least are quite aware of it, and might not be aware that Bill's written what, two books on the Giro d'Italia, as well as a book on the Tour de France. So European cycling is a thing, right? Like that's been a thing
Yeah.
for many a year.
First Tour de
Right?
France was 1903.
Yeah, so there's some history there. For your customers at the time, did they have that same fascination with Italy? Like, was there value add in where the bikes were made, or was it that they came to you because you had built a reputation for good product and a good price, and that was the draw?
Well, not everyone was quite as obsessive compulsive as I am, but um, there was a real enjoyment and appreciation for Italian design, workmanship, and craftsmanship. And the question why uh, not in the United States? At that point, let's say there just wasn't that sort of low cost production demand for it, and Trek was on the horizon, but they weren't there yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I want to get to the title of your book, why your bike is made in Asia. Like
Yes.
what what changed and why? Like when I came into the bike industry about 25 years ago or so, I was riding bikes before, but like that was my entrance into working full time
Mm-hmm.
in the bike biz. And at that point, pretty much everything was being made in Asia, like high end stuff in Taiwan and lower cost stuff
What?
in China or elsewhere. So what happened? Is there like one thing or one time that you can point to as
It
when things begin to change?
well, the Asians, I'm going to backtrack. There was a time when European bicycle manufacturers were innovative and inventive and making wonderful new things. And just after, even after World War II, parallelogram derailleurs, low cost, like the Euratel V, uh, came out. But that Euratel V derailleur, which I know it came out sometime in the 60s. I can't tell you the date. I'd have to look it up. That was still on my bike that I was selling in my shop in 1974. But at the same time, the Japanese, you start looking at, to me, the biggest thing is the Suntour derailleur with a slant parallelogram derailleur, where the jockey wheel tracked down to follow the cogs so that the chain is always at the optimal distance from the freewheel. Shimano was just innovating up a storm, and they were changing while the Europeans wanted to keep making simplex derailleurs out of plastic that uh, the front derailleur, look at a simplex front derailleur, prestige derailleur from 1974. It was a push rod. It wasn't a parallelogram that lifts the chain up onto the next ring. It was just a push rod that shoved the chain. Uh, it was a poor shifting thing. Now, good mechanics can make one of those things work, and we all got adept at it, but it was a poor substitute for good design. Now, Heuret had the parallelogram front derailleur, and of course, Campagnolo, but the Asians, the Japanese at this point, started making vastly superior things to this dated European merchandise. We were selling in the mid and later 70s state of the art product from more than a decade before, and the Japanese were making things that were flat better. Not only were there no giant gaps in the lugs, but the derailleur shifted better. And pretty soon, Shimano started throwing index shifting, and they were giving people what they wanted. They're being responsive and capable.
So it was innovation and high quality product
The
leading
combination,
the way.
yes, exactly,
You
which
know,
is what the Europeans used to do till they got
mhm.
complacent. And the bike boom certainly uh, paid them well for doing a poor job because they were selling all they could make. And
Mhm.
so they couldn't see any reason to change. And the Japanese were just making better stuff all the time. There was no rest.
Today, I think there's not one continent that necessarily has a monopoly on good ideas or innovation for bike frames or bike parts. But manufacturing cost, those realities are maybe not fixed, but there's some places in the world where it's very expensive to make things, and some places where it's very cheap, and some places that are in between. At what point did that become such a strong determinant of where stuff is being made?
I don't know. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
because when I was in the business, the fundamental reason to change and for instance, my company, Torelli, to source all its product from Europe was it was flat superior. Now,
Mm.
for instance, take carbon fiber. Um, Alon, the Italian company that made the screwed and glued aluminum tubing frames that dated back, uh, I guess, to the late 70s. They made carbon fiber tubes the same way, but the Japanese were making monocoque frames. And when I finally had to import a carbon fiber frame, it was made in Taiwan and it was perfect. It was
Hmm.
beautiful. I
Hmm.
didn't like the way it rode because I like steel bikes, but that's not my problem. My job is to make what my customers want to ride and what gives them pleasure. And and this did it superbly. And we had a lot. By the time I sold Torelli in 2007, I we had almost no European product left in our catalog. It just kept switching. Whether it was, I sold Silca floor pumps, uh, and they went out of business, and we ended up with a really beautifully made uh, Taiwanese pump that, like all of them now, the little chuck that goes on the valve that's on the tire would do either Pressa or Schrader.
Hmm.
Just brilliantly made, perfectly made. In fact, the tire pump that I was sent as a sample before I decided importing it, I still have in my garage. That's where I pump up my bike tires with. Still now,
Hmm.
wow,
Hmm.
we're 10, 17, 15, we're 15 years later. It's still
Yeah.
just like new. Although um, I just had a mind fade here. The Silca pumps lasted forever as well, though I have to give them credit for that. That was a well-made product. It just was dated.
Hmm.
They were
Hmm.
great.
And Silica, of course, has come back to the fore now under Josh Portner's uh, guidance with the
He's making them in the
revival
United
of that
States, isn't
brand.
he?
He is making a lot of the stuff in the U.S. Yeah, so in Indianapolis, um, I was just there a couple of months ago. Um, yeah, a lot of the stuff is like that, especially like the high-end pumps are being assembled by hand there online. The titanium cages are being made there by hand, and then he's stepped it up. There's some old school looking things like tie cages made in modern ways, and then there's some ultra modern fabrication by way of 3D printing titanium parts. Um,
Science marches
so
on. Better things for better living.
yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of neat stuff there going on under the Silka banner. Do you think customers now, like if you were to open a bike shop now, do you think customers are concerned about where something is made, or is it more concerned about like what the thing is and the quality of it?
I don't know, but I would guess the intrinsic value of the product is always what drives the sales.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, there can be mystique, an Italian hand-built racing frame. For instance, I sold Mondonigo, and I had third-generation builders there, and they were just exquisite. because of the care. I used to call Antonio Mondonico Benvenuto Cellini because he was
Uh,
such a wonderful artist.
uh,
But
uh,
the demand for uh, steel art frames just dried up, and we Antonio, like I used to take him around once a year, and we'd visit bike shops, and he'd measure people for custom frames, and he would get enough orders on one of those measuring tours, visiting bike shops around the country, that his order book was filled for the year, and you just go
you.
home and spend the year um, building frames.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know if there's that level of patience still of current bicycle riders
Yeah,
to, to wait months and months to
there's
receive a frame. Yeah. Although that said, I remember being at Seven Cycles on the East Coast, and they became so efficient at making custom bicycles, they had an intentional program to slow down delivery because they found that some of their customers would be disappointed if they put in a custom frame and banged it out and received it too quickly. Like, oh, I thought this was special because there's
yes.
like the notion of
Well,
yeah, often an Italian man or woman with opera on in the background, like welding when the mood struck by candlelight or something like this.
Mondonico
But
built them in his house.
yeah,
He had a room in the back of his house, and he would just go downstairs and start bracing. And his son was there, and his son would file and prep stuff, and Antonio would brace it up.
so if somebody asks you the title of your book, why is your bike, why is my bike made in Asia? What is the short answer that you would tell them?
A failure to respond to the customer's wishes and needs.
Hmm.
American and European manufacturers failed to make bikes their customers wanted to buy, and the Asians did. Look. Do you remember Synchro?
Yes.
That was Campagnola's response to index shifting, the initial one. It was awful,
Mhm.
wasn't it? It didn't work. To do
Mhm.
that to a customer and have them spend all this money on a system that doesn't work. And I sold it. I'm guilty. It's another one of my crimes. Um,
Mhm.
uh, Whereas Shimano was making bikes that just clicked and popped into place, and every day Shimano was making it better, which is what a company should do.
Mhm. Mhm. And then, of course, SRAM is now another giant of
Yeah,
parts manufacturing.
they made
It was
what
just
people wanted.
Chicago headquarters, but Taiwanese
They
company
moved
cranking
things
out.
closer, but they made what people wanted with that twist grip and all. That's what people wanted. Just make it easy to ride a bike, make it a
Yeah, grip
pleasure, make
shift.
it a joy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, sir, it's been a joy to talk to you, and I'm assuming it's going to be a joy to read your book. I ordered it, a week or so ago, but I didn't get here in time to read before this interview, so I apologize for that. But I look forward to reading that book. And viewers, if you want to pick up a copy of this book, I'll put a link in the video description so you can check that out and read the words straight from the man himself.
Can I put in a plug here for your local bike shop? If you're going to
By
buy
all means,
or local bookshop, I'm sorry.
you can
I'm
plug local shops of all sorts.
local,
I'm happy to have you
local,
plug both.
local bookshop because they're all small entrepreneurs. All, uh, if you're going to order "Why Your Bike Is Made in Asia" by Bill McGann, um, Amazon is tempting, but the local bookstore would love to have your business. And then
Fair enough.
local bike shop, not a mail order, would be lovely to do all your bike business. There, I said it.
Well said. Well, Mr. McGann, thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate you.
The pleasure was mine, sir.
So thanks for watching. I was surprised by some of what Bill had to say, frankly, and I hope you also found some interesting tidbits there in that conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially about where stuff is made. Does that factor into your decision making process when you're looking to buy a new bike or bike parts? Or is it just about the thing itself or the cost? Let me know in the comments below. Regardless of where your bicycle is made, I hope you can get out there and enjoy the ride.